You're not just parroting what everybody else in your industry is saying. You are saying something that is substantially and interestingly different than what everybody else is saying, right? So what I like to advise my clients is don't just sell to the head, sell to the heart as well as to the head, right? And depending on which quadrant they end up in, you might find that there are some customers that you actually want to fire because they're costing you more than what they're bringing in.
This is the Bender CFO Podcast, where we empower business owners to gain financial clarity and maximize growth.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is Humza Adam, founder and principal of HFactor Solutions, a firm specializing in B2B sales training and marketing strategy. With over a decade of experience in high-value sales and buyer psychology, Humza has helped generate more than $4 billion in sales revenue. He holds 2 master's degrees, one in human factors and another in engineering management, and is a registered corporate coach. Through HFactor Solutions, Humza helps companies master the human side of selling to drive powerful growth. Please welcome Humza Adam to the show. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Shane. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, this is a great discussion. We know how important sales and the whole business development process is to all businesses. And of course, we focus a lot working with smaller businesses, but I just want to know a little bit more about what inspired you to start HFactor Solutions and a little bit more about your background.
Sure. For me, it really started a little over 10 years ago. So just a little background is I've worked in different industries from telecom all the way to aerospace and from small startups all the way to a company with over 70,000 employees. So I've seen a lot throughout my career. And before I decided to start up my own consulting company, this is now almost 10 years ago, I had worked for an aircraft manufacturing company. And basically what that meant was selling and marketing airplanes to airlines across North America. So that includes Canada, US. Had some pretty big name accounts that I was working with: Delta Airlines, United Airlines, American Airlines, Southwest, JetBlue, Virgin America before they merged with Alaska Airlines. So those were all some of my key accounts. And it was good fun. I was involved in selling and marketing all our product lines of airplanes. There was a turboprop, what we call a turboprop airplane. There was a small jet family of airplanes. And then the manufacturers working with decided to launch a brand new, what they call a clean sheet design airplane from scratch, not modifying an existing aircraft, just starting with a clean sheet of paper. And now they were going up in different size category, which meant that we were now going up against the heavyweights of our industry, a place that we had not played in before, right? Going up against the 800-pound gorillas of the industry, Airbus and Boeing. And so it was really interesting, feeling a little bit like the scrappy upstart going against these big behemoths in the industry. And yet we were still able to win, right? There were a couple of my key accounts where we managed to get some pretty significant orders for that new airplane as well. And that includes Air Canada and as well as Delta Airlines. And for me, it got to the point where once we got those on the order books, I felt like I'd climbed the mountain, gotten to the top. And the question was, what's my next challenge? Where do I go from here? Do I really want to continue doing what I'm doing, which is great? Am I really feeling as fulfilled as I could be and should be? And I really got to the sense that no, there's more that I want to be able to do. And where I really felt a bit of a calling was that I felt that smaller organizations, small businesses of many different types, they often struggle with sales. And I said, I have all this expertise in B2B sales and marketing, selling big ticket items like aircraft, but I've also been on the other spectrum and also sold things like long distance minutes for a few cents a piece, right? And I said, all these organizations, they really need a lot. These small businesses, they actually run the economy, but they need a lot of help, right? And they don't have the resources of a nice large aircraft manufacturer to throw at sales and marketing. So they need to be very strategic in terms of how to spend the limited resources they have. And I said, that's a problem I want to solve. I want to be able to help these companies and I want to help them grow. I'm done with the corporate. I just want to work with small business owners and leaders in small and mid-sized businesses. And I really want to help them get to the next level. And I left on my own accord and basically said, that's what I'm going to do from now. I'm opening up HFactor Solutions and I'm open for business. I'm going to help as many small and mid-sized businesses as I can.
Yeah, that's great. I always like that story, and then just being able to take that background of expertise to the small business and start your own business effectively doing that. And so it's a great story. So tell me a little bit about human factors. What is that degree? Just, I know you're in Canada. Just
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about that degree, and you can go further on how it helps you with
Yeah,
success.
so interesting story. I actually got my undergrad and both my master's degrees in Florida, right?
Oh, in
Florida
Florida.
Institute
Okay.
of
All
Technology.
right.
Yeah.
I'm just not as
So
familiar with the term human
yes,
factors. Yeah.
yes.
So,
A lot of people are not sure what it really means. Just a bit of background on that. So my background is also a pilot. So I'm also a licensed pilot as well. And I was an instructor pilot for a while, for quite a while as well. And where this human factors came up was I did a degree that was focused on aviation safety, but a great deal of that, the coursework that we did in my second, in yeah, really was my first master's, was around this whole concept of human factors, right? And what human factors is the concept of how do humans behave, particularly in complex environments, right? And as you can imagine, in the aircraft industry or in the airline industry or anything to do with aircraft, when you make a mistake, if mistakes are made, they can often be fatal, right? Hence, a lot of effort and resources going into how do we prevent mistakes from happening, and when they do happen, how do we prevent them from snowballing into a catastrophe, right? Where an aircraft crashes and lives are lost, right? So that was essentially the conceptually what brought about this field of human factors. Obviously, it applies in other industries as well, nuclear industry and other industries as well. The medical industry has also been learning a lot from the human factors, from the work in human factors in aviation as well. Again, trying to prevent errors. So that was the essential idea. Like, how do human beings work in these
mm,
environments? And what can we
yeah.
do to really mitigate or minimize the risk of errors that can lead to ultimately fatalities? Or if
That's
not the fatalities, they can lead to significant injuries. So that was the idea, to try and prevent that from happening. And so where I took that is I said, you know what? When you're in an airline or in an aircraft and you are trying to do what you can to prevent these mistakes from accumulating and turning into fatalities, that's one thing. How can we use these concepts and these ideas to really help businesses where it's not, mistakes aren't necessarily fatal, they can be dramatic, perhaps, right? Companies going bankrupt, for instance, but they're rarely, if ever, fatal. How do we take these concepts and these ideas about how the human brain works, about human psychology, about the mind-body interaction, about human interactions with machines, right? How do we take all of that and how do we apply it to businesses in general, to not where the focus is not just let's avoid making mistakes, but let's grow this organization in a way that makes it really thrive. What can we leverage about the human capacity and human capability to do that? And that's what inspired me to really call my company HFactor Solutions. You could say the H factor is Humza factor, but it's also really the human factor.
Well, that's great education to me on that, and that makes a lot of sense to really understand the human side in those industries, especially as you were talking about the aviation industry. We all make, I think, people make mistakes. There's a lot of emotion and human side of things, and as I've been trying to study more and more of my business development and that kind of process for my own self, it's just you could have all the logical reasons in the world, but it's some kind of other emotional reason why people will purchase something. So yeah, no, that's great. So I want to switch gears. I want to make sure that we talk a lot about your 6-step H factor framework. So just walk us through that framework and how it helps companies win more clients, more business.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the things I realized as I was starting to serve these smaller businesses was things were often done very ad hoc, right? They didn't really have a lot of systems or processes to do things. It was spur of the moment, fly by the seat of your pants kind of mentality. And that's largely because nobody had ever really sat down and said, okay, what's the best way about going to acquire new clients, for instance? Right? What's the best way to do it? And let's develop a whole process for doing it. It was just like, let's try this, let's try that. If it works, let's keep doing it. And that's pretty much the extent that I've seen in a lot of organizations, particularly small and even mid-sized businesses tend to operate that way, right? Where a lot of things are just not really codified. And I said, one of the biggest leverage points is if you can turn some of these systems, these processes into an end-to-end system, right? That can be repeatably executed, right? And if you can do it well, then what that means is that you now have essentially an almost automatic, not quite automatic because there's still the human aspect that's involved, but you have now a blueprint that you can use and a system that works for you in helping you acquire the right types of clients. Okay, so that's the basis of building this whole framework, right? And I went through all my experience over multiple years. I just distilled it down and said, what are the things that really need to happen in order to build a system like that? And that's where the six-step process came in, right? That's how that was really the inception of the six-step process. And where it all starts is what I call building a solid foundation. That's step number one, building a solid foundation. Now, what do I mean by building a solid foundation? What I mean by that is understanding who is your ideal client. So I call it building your ICP. ICP being your ideal client profile. Okay. What does your ideal client look like? And yes, it's good to understand the demographic aspects, right? The geographic aspects, like where are they? What's even more important than the demographic and geographic aspects are the psychographic aspects, right? Which is really all about what's going on, what's the conversation that's going on in their heads, right? Specifically, you want to get into what are their challenges? What are their frustrations? What are their compelling desires? You really want to nail that down. You really want to understand it as it relates to the problems that you solve, right? So it's getting that deep understanding of your ideal customer. And in tandem with that, you also want to understand or develop what I call your UVP, which is your unique value proposition. And the unique value proposition is all about answering the question, why should they choose me? What is it about me that's unique, that's different versus everybody else who says they can do exactly what I can do, right? They can produce the same thing that I can. What is it about me and the way I do it, the way my company does it, that's different and better for the client in a ways that they would actually appreciate? So that I call that the ICP and the UVP. ICP, the ideal client profile, plus your strong UVP, unique value proposition. That's your foundation, right? On top of that is where you build the other aspects of your system, right? And the reason I say you really want to build a strong foundation is because, as we all know, if you build your house on sand, right, it's not going to last. It's not going to be standing for very long, right? Eventually, everything's going to crumble, right? Same thing with your business. If you don't have a solid foundation of your ICP and UVP all dialed in, it's going to be very hard to build any repeatable success in your business from a sales perspective. And as customers are the lifeblood of any business, generating revenue is the lifeblood of any business, right? It's how you generate cash. It's how you fund your operations. It's how you grow. And so getting that super critical. The second step, and particularly this is really critical for B2B businesses in today's day and age, is essentially building some level of thought leadership, what I call a thought leadership market attraction approach, right? And what that means is distinguishing yourself in the market versus all the other options out there and having your voice become very salient in the market for having a distinctive point of view, right? You're not just parroting what everybody else in your industry is saying. You are saying something that is substantially and interestingly different than what everybody else is saying, right? And this is what causes people to want to pay attention and see what it is you have to say, how is it different, and does it apply to me? And so building that is really critical for success, right? Particularly in B2B or business-to-business organizations. So that's really step two. Then step three is having some kind of targeted outreach or outbound activities happening. When I work with clients, we call it building a targeted outreach plan, right? And there's different ways of going about it. There's different channels that you could use. And when I work with my clients, we explore the channels that might make the most sense. But the idea behind step three is you're not just waiting for business to come to you. You're not just waiting for passive referrals, which is the way a lot of particularly service-based businesses operate, is they're just relying on referrals. And the problem with that is that they can be fairly unpredictable. You never know when the next one is going to come and how good it's going to be. So with targeted outreach, you are now taking some control over what's coming in, right? Because you've identified who you're really trying to go after. You're identifying what are the ways I can go after them, right? Whether it is through attending specific targeted events where your ICPs or ideal clients would be. Speaking at those kinds of events, that could be another strategy as well. Using your thought leadership that we developed in step 2. Also, other ways of doing outbound, for instance, using social tools like LinkedIn. There's email outbound approaches as well, email, calling, and so on. There's a plethora of ways that you can do outbound outreach. And included with that is also reaching out to your existing clients and being very proactive about generating referrals through your existing clients. A lot of service-based organizations are not very proactive about generating referrals, but it can be done. You can actually be very proactive about generating referrals. You just have to ask in the right way at the right time, right? And so I teach my clients what's the best way to do that and how to do it. So that's step 3. Then step 4 is building or refining a client acquisition process, including a strong follow-up process as well. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is understanding what are the core steps, what are the minimum steps, is another way to put it, that I have to take a prospect through to turn them from being just a name on a list, right, or somebody I've come in contact with, to a signed and paying client. What is this series of steps? You can call them stages, steps, whatever you prefer, but what is that series of stages or steps that you need to take a prospect through to turn them into a client, and to do that consistently with every prospect you come across? What does that look like? And that's part of building that system, is understanding what those stages are, right? And also having a good follow-up process, which means that as you have conversations with a particular prospect, particularly if you are selling something of significant value that is relational and not transactional, right? You need to be building the relationship as you go, right? And what that means is you need to continue to follow up, because typically most sales don't happen on the first interaction. It takes a series of interactions. So you have to be fairly persistent and know how to be professionally persistent, so you're not perceived as a pest, but that you're adding value, you're creating value, and you're differentiating yourself versus the pack, so that people ultimately feel Shane is who I want to do business with, right? Shane really gets it. It's provided so much value, and having him start paying him yet, right? That's essentially the idea behind step number 4. Then step number 5 is building a performance tracking and feedback system. And this is basically using the tools and techniques that, for instance, with a CRM, which is a customer relationship management platform, right? There are many out there. There's HubSpot, Salesforce.com, which might be overkill for many small businesses. But whatever system you use, Pipedrive, another one, whatever system you use, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you are tracking and measuring the right things using that system. Even if you're using a spreadsheet system, you want to make sure you're tracking the right metrics, right? Because that's really critical, so that you can understand what's happening from one stage to the next. Where are the leaks in my funnel? And when you can identify those leaks, you can apply targeted interventions to correct the deficiencies and improve your process, improve your conversion rates, right? Not just from prospect to customer, but from stage to stage. And if you apply that continuous improvement approach, you'll be amazed at how significant the increase in your client base becomes, the growth in your client base, as well as obviously your revenue. And the last and final step is really driving for excellence in client winning interactions. So what I mean by that is really honing your skills in terms of, for instance, if I'm prospecting, what are the best ways to go about prospecting so I get the best results while spending at least a certain amount of time? I'm getting the efficacy as well as the efficiency. in terms of my performance, right? So things like skills like prospecting, in qualifying, in presenting, or even before presenting, in discovery, right? Understanding what all is going on here and how do I get the prospect to elicit what the major pains and challenges are that they have that I can actually solve, right? Because that's really critical for building any type of solution. And then presenting is a really key skill. How do you present the value that you can create to solve those problems, right? To deal with the challenges that they have, to help them achieve their aspirational goals, right? And then ultimately, how do you go about closing, right? Because that can all be for naught if you don't know how to take it to a close, right? So it's honing all of those skills. And that's where the human interaction makes a big difference. It's the human to human interaction where the rubber really meets the road. And if you can do all of those steps really well, then your potential is tremendous. It's just a matter of scaling. But before you scale, and this is what I advise many organizations I work with, is before you start hiring people to do sales for you or hiring more salespeople, make sure you've got your system honed in. It's working like a well-oiled machine, and you've got that continuous improvement process going, right? And once you have that working, now let's start looking at, okay, how do we add some more rocket fuel to this thing?
Well, Humza, yeah, that was very educational there to go through that with everybody. And I'm just going to do a little recap because I tried to take notes. As far as I can tell, your step one has to do with your ideal client, your unique value proposition, understanding that, make sure you have that foundation. The two, thought leadership, market penetration around how you're differentiating yourself. Three, a targeted outreach process. There's many different, we discussed different ways to do that. Four, refining your client acquisition process, having that process and that follow up that's needed. Five, performance tracking, like a CRM, having a system that you track how and the feedback and how everything's going. And six is like the interactions, improving the client, winning interactions is what I wrote there as well. Is that a quick recap of all six?
Well done, Shane. Well
All
done.
right, taking good notes. I hope
Yeah.
you guys are taking some notes, but there's definitely a lot to it. And I know that depending on how experienced someone is in the business development process, sometimes you got to go back to the basics. Sometimes people are very experienced, and then due to whatever reason, one way or the other, their close rate starts dropping, or they're just not getting the business they want, and you have to like go back to the basics or what's wrong and tweak. So I think that it's helpful for people of all levels and business. Many times, if you're a small business, as a business owner, you are usually one of the key business development personnel on the team. Or if you're getting larger, you're trying to eventually grow a sales team and people look to you on and so that I think this is all very important. I don't know if a company's looking to grow revenue quickly, which of those six steps should they focus on first? Is it step one? Is it like how would you describe that? If you're trying to grow quickly, where should they start?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where I always advise every client to start is make sure you've nailed down your foundation, right? Your
Yeah.
ICP and your UVP, right? That's really critical. And then once you have that dialed in and you've identified who are the best types of clients I want, right? Then you want to develop a strategy to effectively go out and find them. And that's where you identify where do they hang out, right? What are the types of events they go to? Right? I need to be there as well, right? Outbound prospecting is one of the fastest ways to build your pipeline. So you need to have a system for doing the outbound targeted outreach I talked about earlier. If you're really looking to grow fast, that will be one of the best things that you could do. But you need to have a process for how you do it. You don't just wing it and throw stuff out there and hope for the best. That doesn't work very well. That often works a lot better than investing a lot of these other marketing activities, although that's always great. That's good for longer term type of growing your pipeline activities. That's good for that. But if you really want to grow fast, then having some kind of outbound outreach going on is going to be really critical for success in the short term and obviously over the short and medium term as well. You never want to stop doing it. You always want to keep doing it. It's just that if you're at a stage where you really need to grow your revenue, outbound is the way to do it the fastest.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense into understanding that ideal client. And it made me, as you were talking, to realize that it's possible that changes a little bit over time. You have to reassess how that could be, what that looks like specifically, especially the psychology. I don't know. I always find it fascinating how much you bring psychology into the process. Is there something like a tangible idea or question or something that you could provide a nugget? It's like, hey, this is how to really add to that psychological part in the sales process. This is a good question to ask. This is a good way to come to the meeting. How would you answer that?
Yeah, yeah. And what I do with my clients is we actually prepare for every meeting. So one of the things I recommend is have a structure for how you'd like that meeting to go, right? What
Yeah.
are the things that I need to learn from this particular individual or these individuals? Sometimes you might be speaking to multiple people at the same time in that meeting. What are the things I need to learn about them, about the organization, about their challenges? Right? So I can see how I might be able to best help them, right?
Mhm.
And then the share piece is what are things that I should be ready to share or that I want to share, because the things that you don't want it to be, you don't want that meeting to feel like an interrogation, even if it's a polite interrogation with all these questions I'm peppering them to find out all
Yeah.
the things, right? It needs to feel more like a conversation, like a two-way conversation. So picking up on things they said, and then leveraging some of the things they said to launch into some stories that you can share about things that you've seen with similar clients in similar situations, right? Because you want to build that trust and credibility with a prospect, right? At the end of the day, it all comes down to the emotional resonance that you have with a prospect. Because even in B2B, and I've seen it happen many times, is it's not all just about the ROI, the rational case, right? That's important. And don't get me wrong, it needs to be there, but it doesn't all rest on that. People make emotional decisions, right? They like to think that they're being rational, but in reality, emotion has a tremendous amount of influence in
Yeah.
which direction a person goes in. And if you're not connected to that, you're not connecting to that, right? Then that would be a reason why you might be missing out on opportunities that you would otherwise win. So what I like to advise my clients is don't just sell to the head, sell to the heart as well as to the head, right? So you need to understand, you ask questions that elicit what is really important to this person. What do they really care about? What are they really passionate about, right? What's really causing them a lot of pain, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
great.
you lean into that and connect with that. And once you do that, once people feel that, wow, Shane really gets me. Shane's really taking the time to understand where I'm at. I feel like Shane really wants to help me out. And once they get that feeling, they start to open up even more and share even more because you're building that trust and they feel that they don't feel like you're trying to take advantage of them. They feel like you're actively trying to help them. And they become much more willing about sharing information that they would not normally share.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And definitely seen that in action. And it can be difficult to somebody who doesn't have as much experience in that. So you just have to, like you said, get your reps and do it and fine tune the process. And sometimes we overthink too much about the meeting and try to overschedule it to the point where you don't have a lot of room for the unknown or the emotional aspect or something that you didn't expect to dig deep in. So it's this balance for
Exactly,
sure.
exactly,
For
exactly.
sure.
And what I say is that you always want to have a plan so
Yeah.
that you can at least guide the conversation in a particular direction. You have a destination that you're trying to take the conversation. So you should
Right.
always know what do I believe would be a good next step
Yeah.
from here, right? Once, by the end of this conversation, where would I like to have them comfortable with moving forward as a next step? Or where would I like that to be? What would I like that next step to be?
Yeah.
And it's really about handling the conversation in that way to drive towards that outcome. Now, as that famous philosopher Mike Tyson once said, is everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Yeah.
So things are not always going to go according to your plan. Right? So you have to be ready to adapt and adjust as things go along. And
Mm.
you might find that the plan that you built was actually not very relevant or not the right plan through the course of the conversation. And you need to be able to think on your feet and adapt. But as long as you have an end destination in mind, that makes it a lot easier. The whole preparation piece makes it a lot easier to steer the conversation in any particular direction and where you maintain control of where that conversation is going.
Yeah, that's great. Now, I think there's an abundance of information I'm sure you could share with us today, and I do appreciate the conversation. Just as we're ending, is there like one final piece or something you want to share with us that you didn't get a chance to share that really could help business owners be successful in this process?
Yeah, one thing I would say is that I find that a lot of businesses, they don't really they don't really take as good care of their customers as they could and they should. They don't really, what I mean by that is a lot of businesses, if you ask them, business owners, if you ask them, what's your most important asset? Some might say it's our product, it's our service, it's what we do. Some might say it's our employees, right? I think the better answer is it's your customers and your list of customers, right? I think that is your most important asset, right? And a lot of businesses don't really look at it that way. And the reason I think that perspective is really important is it gets you to really focus more on your customers, right? Rather than on your product, rather than on your employees. And don't get me wrong, those are all great assets to have. A great product, a great service, a great brand, a great group of employees. That's all fantastic, right? But if you lose sight of the customer, then you're at risk of losing everything because it all rests on the customer. And what I advocate is really understand all your customers. And there's a concept I just ran across recently that's called customer profitability mapping, right? Where the whole idea is understanding the profitability level of each customer, as well as the resonance level, which is to say, how good of a customer are they, right? Do they really value you, your product, your employees? What's the quality of the interactions? And you do that exercise and you're able to put your customers in one of 4 quadrants, right? And depending on which quadrant they end up in, you might find that there are some customers that you actually want to fire because they're costing you more than what they're bringing in. And that time and effort and those resources that they're costing you could be better served on your ICP, your ideal customers who would value and appreciate your time, your effort, your resources on producing products and services for them, right? And if you can shift your focus from the ones who are detractors from your brand to ones who appreciate your value and love working with you, you can find more of those. You can grow that quadrant of customers. And you can and a great customer, you are able to cross-sell, you're able to upsell to them far easier than you are to sell somebody brand new to your business.
Yeah.
What we call the cost to serve is much, much lower, right?
Yeah.
For existing customers than going out and finding brand new customers. So while, every business should be going out and getting new customers, don't neglect your existing customers because they can be a tremendous source of value for you if you're able to maximize what we call the CLV or customer lifetime value by identifying opportunities to serve them better, serve them more, cross-selling, upselling, right? And also they can be a fantastic source of referrals, right? Great customers make great new customers, right? Because they can bring in new referrals who are similar to them. That's something that I find a lot of businesses overlook, is really valuing their customers to the extent they should be valued.
That's great, Humza. I appreciate this conversation today. And I think so many good nuggets that we should all in our businesses really adhere. And if you want to say something about how they could get a hold of you, we'll put some information too in the show notes and some other areas to be able to access. But if you really want to talk to you further about helping them or them in their sales process, how would they do that?
I think that one of the best ways to get in touch with me is you can look me up on LinkedIn, Humza Adam. I think we'll have the link in the show notes as well. And reach out to me, connect. I just mentioned that you heard me on Shane's podcast, and I'll happily accept your connection request. And I'd be happy to have a conversation. You could also check out my company website. It's HFactorSolutions.com. And there's a contact form if you want to reach out to me. You can reach out to me through that form as well.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Humza. We appreciate your time today. And we had a good discussion. Hope you have a great day.
Yeah, you too. So this was fun, Shane.
Yes.
All right. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to the Bender CFO Podcast. Help us out by subscribing on YouTube so you don't miss another episode, or listen to us on Spotify and rate us 5 stars so more people can get this content to help their businesses grow and be successful.